Welcome to the Effortless Swimming Podcast. My guest today is Gavin Williams from Neuro Solutions. Gavin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brent. Cheers.
So the reason I wanted to get in touch with you is you've got a background in neurological rehabilitation, which you've been in that field for a very long time. And a friend of mine who's a fellow swim coach, he mentioned that he went and saw you for some issues that he had after having some back surgery. And he was chatting to you as he was going through the rehab, and he said he learned a lot in terms of how he could help his swimmers improve their technique and basically make changes to their technique a lot more effectively and a lot faster based on some of the stuff that that he was chatting to you about. So it would be great to get a bit of your background in rehabilitation and some of the study that you've done that sort of changed the way that people go about recovering from traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and keep the background a little bit brief. But so basically, I'm a physio. I work between Epworth Hospital and Melbourne Uni. So I spend half my time doing clinical work and half my time doing research. So I finished a PhD about 15 years ago, and since then, our research has looked at trying to improve people's outcomes from brain injury, and that also brain injury meaning traumatic brain injury, which is mostly a result of road trauma, but we also do work in MS and stroke and other neurological conditions. So it's primarily neurological. And one of the things that happened, like when I was a student 30 years ago, is that there was a lot of focus on spasticity and stretching and muscle stiffness and stuff like that. And that's changed enormously over the last 20 years. And now it's widely recognized that the main problem limiting people's abilities to walk and run and move about after a brain injury or a neurological event is muscle weakness. So there's been a big focus, lots of trials around the world looking at doing strength training to improve people's mobility. And what has happened over maybe the last 10 to 15 years is that people have used some of the strength training guidelines, which I'll talk about in this session, to try and improve people's walking. And so we've got very good evidence now that strength training works for people who are very weak with a whole range of neurological conditions, whether it's cerebral palsy or stroke or brain injury or MS, but very limited evidence that people walk any better as a result, or run or do anything, movement-wise. And so basically we've improved the problem, but we haven't improved people's function. So, I suppose the analogy for you is that, if you're a swimmer, it's all very nice to become stronger, but what's the point if you're not going to swim any faster? So our research over the last 5 to 10 years is focused on why is everything, previously failed, and how can we better apply strength training to improve the outcome, that we're trying to achieve.
And so what were some of those things that they were doing 15, 20 years ago that weren't having great results?
So they were having good results in that, like the initial studies were really proof of concept, because they didn't know if you're weak because you've had a stroke or you've got cerebral palsy, we had no evidence that people could actually get stronger. So those initial studies were great because they showed that the strength training worked. But I think in hindsight, what happened was that we identified that weakness was the main problem. And so if you're smart, you'd think, okay, weakness is the main problem. We'll go to the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines for strength training or resistance training. So there's a big body of evidence. Okay, what is the best way to make people stronger? And there is no doubt that progressive resistance strength training is by far the best method to become stronger. And so that's a process where you typically use high loads, low reps, low sets, and you don't necessarily aim to improve the number of reps and sets you're doing. You progressively change the resistance and the load. And so that's what happened. They used what was really the best practice for strength training, best practice strength training to improve people's walking. But there were two main problems with that. The first one was it wasn't specific. So they were doing general leg strengthening exercises. Now, when you walk, all the muscles in your legs are important for various reasons, but the vast majority of the work, nearly 100% of all the work that propels you when you walk, comes from 3 muscle groups and 3 muscle groups only. So those 3 muscle groups were not targeted, and it's not because they're not known. There's a massive body of work in biomechanics to say this is what the muscles do and this is how the muscles function when you walk. And so the same body of work would be well known in swimming, I would imagine, with the various strokes. So that was one problem, that the specificity of the training in terms of, at the most basic level, selecting the muscles was not targeted. And then the other key problem was that progressive resistance training, even though it's very effective at making you stronger, it is by its nature very slow. Okay, and so the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines have a whole different part of their guidelines that talk about task specificity in terms of their strength training, and particularly in walking, which would be the same in swimming and running and most sporting activities, is that muscles contract quickly. And so, you know, there is a place for doing heavy, slow resistance training, but to improve function or to improve the outcome you're trying to achieve, so in your case, swimming, you need to be exercising the muscles quickly. And so it's the conceptual difference between strength and power. So strength is how much force you can, how much weight you can lift, how much force you can generate. So that's the measure of strength. Whereas power is not how much force you can lift or how much force you can generate, but how quickly you can generate that force. So it's the rate that the force is generated, not the maximum amount of force.
And so you've what you're doing now is it's more ballistic strength training from what I read. So it's shorter, it's a lot shorter, it's a lot faster, and that's is that having a different result, or it's getting people quicker to the result that they're having before?
Yeah, so we're running a couple of randomized controlled trials around Australia in cerebral palsy, stroke, brain injury. And so basically the preliminary evidence says that it works, but we've got larger trials underway. So whether you use the term ballistic or plyometric or power training, so they all imply that you're doing the strength training quickly. Okay, so there's some subtle differences between ballistic and plyometric, for example, but the more important message is that you do strength training that's done more quickly. But the speed is only one aspect of it. So you've got to pick the right muscles. You've got to try and replicate the speed of the movement within the exercise itself. So I think more broadly or conceptually, when you're training or coaching, you can just swim. You can actually practice what you're trying to improve, or you can go away and do some other gym-based work to make yourself stronger in order to swim better. So once you stop actually practicing the task of freestyle, for example, and you're going to go in the gym, you then need to make sure those exercises you're doing for your arms and legs and core replicate how those muscles function during swimming. So what range do they work through? Is it through the whole range of motion in the shoulder, or what range of motion in the elbow? Is that action concentric or eccentric? Means, is the muscle working and getting shorter, or is the muscle working and getting longer at the same time? How quickly does the joint move? So how quickly does the muscle have to contract? You're looking at, you're doing an exercise and you're focusing on the shoulder, but what position is the body and the elbow at the same time? So thinking about the whole kinetic chain and not just one joint in isolation.
And one of the things that I was chatting on the phone to Nick with last week about, one of the correlations that he sort of made is a lot of swimmers will do TheraBand work before they train or outside of the pool. And obviously a lot of shoulder work with it. And one of the things that that we've worked with a lot of adults with before is just practicing the catch, which is basically the first part of the stroke with the arm. And that is one of the hardest things for people to get in the water, sometimes because of mobility, but it's one of those things that it's a very unnatural movement for them to make. And he was saying that once you've got that technique down, that is particularly with adults who haven't maybe learned to swim as a kid, we want to get that movement right first, and we may have to do that slowly to get them to know how to do it. But then if you want to be able to reinforce it and get them to be able to do it in the water with some TheraBands, you can get them doing it, but it's probably best done at a similar speed to what you do when you swim. And so that sort of stuff was really, really interesting to hear about the best way to, I guess, reinforce it and to I don't know how you phrase it, but like the stronger neural, what do you call it? Like
pathways or patterns or something like, something like that.
Yeah. Yep. And so now with this, like people learning basically how to walk again, is it similar to someone learning basically learning an action from scratch? Like you.
Yeah. So like I'm dealing with people who, have had a life-changing event and, may not be able to walk, and, you're just hoping that they will be able to walk again. And then once they can walk, then you're looking at, can they run? Can they get back to, some of the things they were doing beforehand, whether it's, basketball or tennis or swimming or riding a bike or whatever. But there's many, many parallels between that and coaching. So I've done a lot of coaching of, kids footy and athletics and stuff like that. And it's really the same process, just at a much different level for our patients. So, it's about a skill-based progression, and it's really, at the end of the day, it's the controlled application of force. And, if anyone's done a skillful, obviously swimming is very skillful, but something that's more observable, like, tennis or golf, it's very, very skillful. But as soon as you try that little bit harder, often the performance goes out the window. If there's a bit more pressure, the performance goes out the window. So whether it's my patient learning how to walk or, a kid or an adult I'm coaching, it's still all about the controlled application of force. So, we've certainly got some, sort of strict protocols about how we go about strength training, but there's a number of reasons why you would do strength or resistance training. So, the evidence in the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines would say you don't do fast strength training until you've got a base first. Okay, you don't. If you are relatively untrained, you need to get a base of a base level of strength, and you need to not do that with fast strength training because it's potentially injurious. So once you've got a base, then you can progress on to some faster strength training. But the other reason why you do a number of different resistance exercises is just for, as injury prevention, just to have a good base of strength so that you're less likely to become injured to begin with. So a lot of that is, protective in nature. But mostly what I've been talking about to date is about the aspect of the resistance training that's about performance, and improving performance.
And what about on a working with your clients on a personal level? Are you sort of upfront when you first work with them? How are you framing it to them in terms of how long it will take, what they're likely to go through, and has that changed for you over the last, say, 20 years when you first started doing it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When we were been talking or emailing previously, and for your listeners, like last time I went swimming, someone jumped in to try and save me. Like, I am not at home in the water at all. But having had kids that went through swimming lessons years ago, I sort of reflect on the swimming lessons as a model for my patients, because with the swimming lessons, it's a skill-based progression. Okay. And it's, you don't go up a grade or a level just because you're a year older or, some date has passed in the diary. It's a skill-based progression. And I think that's a fantastic model. And that's similar to how Auskick and some of it, other sports have embraced kids, with more like cricket and soccer and stuff like that. So, it's a great model of the skill-based progression. So that's, really what we're doing with our patients and saying, okay, I know you want to be able to walk, but at the moment you can't stand up. So this is the hierarchy of difficulty. So, the first thing is standing, and then transferring, and then walking. And then once you're walking, going up and down stairs, and then running, and then, agility training, and then preparation for sport. So yeah, there's a hierarchy and a skill-based progression that underlines that.
And how often are you having your patients on average do these exercises each week?
Pretty much every day.
Yeah.
We're talking about inpatients. So a lot of our patients are in hospital for, weeks or months. So that's several times a day in physio. And then when they go home, they might be coming in maybe 3 days a week, but we'd also be setting up with a home or gym program to supplement that, which would be another 3 days a week. And really we sort of treat our patients like we'd be coaching, someone for a sport, like I said, just at a lower level. So, they should be working 5 or 6 days a week. And so the other sporting analogy we use for them is, if you can't walk and you want to be able to walk, it's like, training for a marathon. You don't train for a marathon once a week. You don't do your exercises once a week and expect you're going to be able to walk. You really have to work your ass off, because it's, the hardest thing you are ever going to achieve.
And I imagine that, unlike some homework that people get, or just exercises they might get for a slightly hurt shoulder, they're probably doing them on a daily basis, because wanting to get back to walking would be a pretty basic, but just really goal that's going to give them a lot more freedom and satisfaction in life.
So it's the number one goal that patients have. So, but as soon as they achieve that goal, there's more to life than just being able to walk. So they want to be able to then get back to what they did beforehand. So, like, we've got programs where we teach them how to run, how to ride a bike, how to swim. We have relationships with Disabled Winter Sports Victoria, so we get them up to the snow. We send them off to people to teach them how to surf. We're really trying to get it. It's that. It's the end of the rehab phase where we talk about participation. That's where we need to do a lot of work, because the patients in hospital who are quite disabled, they get treatment, but once they're sort of independent, then we need to do that at the tail end of the rehab, where we're actually reintegrating people and getting them back to what they want to be able to do.
And with your own coaching of kids sports, what have you taken from what you've learned in your role or in your job into the kids coaching?
Don't do it. It's great fun. It's interesting. So we do a lot of running stuff with our patients with neurological conditions, and so we're known for that. And I'm now in a fortunate position where I get to go all over the world teaching courses on how you teach people how to walk and run and improve their mobility. It's interesting from a running perspective with able-bodied sport is very few, obviously swimming doesn't involve running, but most sports involve, running, whether it's tennis or netball or hockey or, you name it, it involves running. And very, very few people have ever been taught how to run. It's just, you just take it for granted you can run. And, my athletic club, we used to run one of the drink stations at the Melbourne Marathon, and over half the people running past, you could, quickly take aside and actually fix up their running technique, which is sort of weird, because if I never played tennis growing up, but, if you play tennis, it's all about technique. And if you're going to be a swimmer, it's all about technique. You just get smashed about technique. Whereas with running, everyone just runs. And, you've probably got some triathlete listeners there. And, if you've got a good engine, you just keep running and running and running. And very rarely do people actually, do they know what good running technique is, and how do we teach running technique?
It's do you think it's something that's come about because we've become much more inactive over the last, 50 years or whatever, and you think it's something that we may have just naturally done, is had good technique, like say many, many years ago? Or is it something that you think we've learned more about and we've been able to study it and we know what works well?
So there's a lot of research in that field, and it's partly controversial, but if anyone's interested, you Google Professor Daniel Lieberman at Harvard Uni in America, and he is called the barefoot running professor. He's into barefoot running, and he's done all this research with kids in Kenya, and goes out to villages where they've never seen shoes, and analyzes their running technique. And when you look at those East African runners, like, they just move beautifully, and everyone appreciates a beautiful runner like Kathy Freeman or Usain Bolt. So people know what a good-looking runner is when they see a good-looking runner. It's just, okay, well, this person doesn't look, you go out on a Sunday morning and see the Sunday Warriors, and, they don't look like they're moving that efficiently, but what do you do about it? And, if you're a swimming coach, you would know what suboptimal technique is, and you'd be trying to change that. But the knowledge around running is less well known, I suppose.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. I mean, I get that a lot when we're coaching people. Is I've got to always remember that most of the time the people who see us, they've never had a proper swimming lesson, maybe as a kid, but nothing as an adult, or nothing to actually improve their freestyle. And so always just trying to keep it as basic as possible, and getting rid of a lot of the jargon, and just explain it in a really simple way. Because I mean, I think to when I was growing up swimming, I only really learnt it just by doing it. And we certainly got some coaching and stuff, but we didn't have down to water filming that we've got these days. And it was just through repetition and intuition that you sort of figure out the best possible way to move through the water. But we never had that feedback. So I think by kind of having those fundamentals in the back of your mind, and knowing your craft well, you can really boil it down to what they might be missing. And it sounds like that's sort of what you pick up a lot with the people when they're running, is you can look at them and see that they may not be using the right muscles, or they may be landing funny.
I think, from a coach's perspective, or even the athlete's perspective, having a very good knowledge of the fundamentals of biomechanics. So the biomechanics of walking, the biomechanics of running, the biomechanics of, football, kicking a football, Latrobe, you've done a lot of that. The biomechanics of swimming technique. And so the first of all, is what the movement should look like. And then once you know that, what muscles then generate that movement, and then breaking that down further into, so I mentioned before, what phase of the stroke do they work? What range do they work? What are the other joints doing at the same time? How quickly do they have to contract? Stuff like that. And then if I'm going to get this swimmer out the pool and give them a land-based strength training program, which is probably what everyone's been doing lately with COVID, how do you best replicate that training that they're not getting in the pool? Or how do I best implement a strength training program to supplement what they are doing in the pool? Because it's very, very easy to get it wrong, I think. The difference between what you might be doing as a coach and what I'm doing as a physio in a neurological rehab ward is that swimmers, by and large, or any sports person, is already skilled to a certain extent. So even if you stuff up their strength training program, they're already highly skilled, so they may benefit to some extent. My patients aren't skilled at all. We're trying to improve their skill and their strength or power generation at the same time. So it's, arguably far more important for us to get the application and implementation right.
And what you mentioned earlier on, that one of the things is the mobility. So when you see patients, a lot of them, they don't have the mobility because they haven't used those muscles for a long time, and you need to get that range of motion back. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, so they're typically, so here at Epworth, we're the largest road trauma unit in Australia. So once people are survivors, once they get ill, say the Alfred or Royal Melbourne, something like that, once they're off a ventilator, they come to us for rehab. And so they're often unconscious or waking up from a coma. And, so that might have been days or weeks or sometimes months. And I'm going to teach them how to roll over, how to sit up, how to stand. And so partly it'll be to do with muscle stiffness or joint stiffness, or problems with balance, fear of falling, muscle weakness, problems with motor control or coordination of movement, muscle spasticity and stiffness. So there's a whole lot of physical impairments that we need to address. But the thing that determines how well they ultimately do is how strong they then become.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast, and I think it's really good to look outside the swimming world and see what the stuff that you've researched. And I think that's it's why I found it really interesting why Nick was talking about the stuff that you do. So I appreciate you being on the podcast. And for people who are listening, where's the best place to find out a bit more about your work?
Probably Melbourne Uni. Google Gavin Williams, Melbourne Uni. Most of my work should be on the Find an Expert page there.